The dust-laden wind carried whispers of change as Madeline Evans stepped off the stagecoach in Austin, Texas. The scorching June sun of 1875 beating down on her travel-worn bonnet. Her trembling fingers clutched the deed to her late uncle's property, 5 acres of untamed prairie land, with a small cabin that now represented her only hope for a fresh start after fleeing a loveless arranged marriage in Boston. "Miss, your luggage," the stagecoach driver called, dropping her 2 modest trunks onto the dirt road before tipping his hat and climbing back onto his perch. Madeline gathered her skirts and approached the nearest establishment, a general store with a weathered sign swinging from rusted hinges. Inside, the shopkeeper, a man with kind eyes and a gray-streaked beard, looked up from his ledger. "You must be Henry Evans' niece," he said, recognition dawning on his face. "Heard you might be coming to claim his place. Mighty sorry about your uncle's passing." "Thank you," Madeline replied, adjusting her gloves nervously. "Could you direct me to his property? I understand it's some distance from town." The shopkeeper frowned. "It's nearly 3 miles northeast, miss. Too far for a lady to walk with luggage." "Let me see if I can find someone to drive you out there." While the shopkeeper stepped outside to locate assistance, Madeline browsed the store's offerings, calculating what supplies she could afford with her dwindling funds. Her gaze lingered on a shelf of seed packets, vegetables, and wildflowers that might bring life to her uncle's abandoned land. "Miss Evans," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm Sheriff Thomas Wilson. Walter here tells me you need a ride out to the old Evans place." The sheriff was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a silver star pinned to his vest. He offered a polite nod. "I'd be happy to take you there myself, but I'm afraid I've got business in town. However, my deputy can arrange for your things to be delivered later today. In the meantime, you might want to know that the place has been sitting empty for months. It won't be in the best condition." "I'm prepared for hard work, Sheriff," Madeline replied with more confidence than she felt. "I intend to make a proper home there." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "Alone? That's mighty ambitious for a city lady. The nearest neighbor is the Hammond Ranch, and that's a good mile away." Madeline lifted her chin. "My father taught me to be self-sufficient before his passing. I may have been living in Boston, but I haven't forgotten those lessons." After purchasing essential supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, and those seed packets that had caught her eye, Madeline followed the sheriff's directions and began the long walk to her new home. The Texas landscape stretched out before her, vast and untamed. Wildflowers dotted the prairie grasses, swaying in the afternoon breeze. In the distance, she could make out a small structure, her uncle's cabin, she presumed, and her heart quickened with both anticipation and apprehension. By the time she reached the property, her dress was damp with perspiration, and her feet ached in her impractical city shoes. The cabin was exactly as the sheriff had warned, weathered and neglected, with a sagging porch and shutters hanging askew. Beside it stood a small barn, its door half open and creaking in the wind. And there, near the road, was an aged mailbox mounted on a crooked post, its rusted flag raised high. Curious, Madeline approached and cautiously opened the box, surprised to find a folded piece of paper inside. She withdrew it, unfolded the rough parchment, and read the bold, slanted handwriting. "To the new owner of the Evans place, meet me at sundown. I have information you'll want to hear. G.V." Madeline's pulse quickened. Who was this mysterious G.V., and how did they know she had arrived? The sun was already beginning its descent toward the western horizon. She had only a few hours to prepare for this unexpected meeting. With renewed determination, Madeline entered the cabin. Inside, a thin layer of dust covered everything, but the furniture remained a small table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the stone fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner, and a few shelves holding assorted kitchenware. She found a broom in a small pantry and set to work, opening windows to let in the fresh air as she swept and dusted. By late afternoon, the deputy arrived with her trunks. He seemed surprised by the transformation she'd already achieved. "Madam, Sheriff Wilson asked me to check if you're settling in all right," he said, placing her trunks inside the door. "Is there anything else you need?" Madeline hesitated, then asked, "Do you know anyone with the initials GV? They left me a note in the mailbox." The deputy's expression shifted. "That'd be Grant Vaughn. He owns the neighboring ranch to the north. Used to help your uncle from time to time." He paused. "He's a good man, Miss Evans, but keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife and young daughter to fever 5 years back." After the deputy left, Madeline unpacked her few belongings, changed into a fresh dress, and heated water to wash away the travel dust. As sundown approached, she paced nervously, wondering whether to meet this stranger or bar the door instead. Curiosity won. As the sky turned a brilliant orange, Madeline stepped onto her porch to wait. From the north, she spotted a figure on horseback approaching at a steady trot. She smoothed her skirts and stood straight, determined to show no fear. The rider drew near a tall man astride a chestnut stallion. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, casting shadows across features that appeared chiseled from the same rugged landscape around them. His shirt was plain but clean, his vest dusty from the ride. When he dismounted and removed his hat, Madeline observed piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Miss Evans," he said, his voice deep and graveled. "I'm Grant Vaughn. Forgive the mysterious note. Wasn't sure when you'd arrive." Madeline nodded cautiously. "Mr. Vaughn, you said you have information for me." He gestured toward the well at the side of the cabin. "May I?" She nodded, and he dropped the bucket down, drawing up water to offer his horse before speaking again. "Your uncle and I had an arrangement," he explained. "I helped maintain his place, used his pasture for some of my cattle in exchange for keeping an eye on things." He paused, studying her face. "No offense meant, madam, but this land requires constant attention. The creek to the east floods during spring rains. Coyotes come after chickens if you're planning to keep any, and there's work needed on that roof before the next storm." "Are you suggesting I can't handle it?" Madeline asked, her voice sharper than intended. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm suggesting the same arrangement might benefit us both. I need the grazing land. You need a helping hand, at least until you're properly settled." Madeline considered his offer. Having assistance would certainly make things easier, but she was wary of becoming dependent on a stranger, especially a man whose intense gaze made her oddly self-conscious. "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Vaughn," she finally said. "I accept your offer, provided we establish clear terms." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "I'll stop by tomorrow morning to discuss details and take a look at that roof. For tonight, though." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Thought you might need this. Fresh bread from my housekeeper and some smoked venison." The unexpected kindness caught Madeline off guard. "Thank you," she said softly. "Lock your door tonight," he advised, mounting his horse. "And if you need anything before morning, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll hear it." With that, he replaced his hat, tipped it slightly, and rode back the way he had come, leaving Madeline staring after him with the food clutched to her chest and a strange flutter in her stomach that she attributed to hunger. True to his word, Grant Vaughn returned the following morning, arriving just as Madeline finished her breakfast of bread and coffee. He brought tools and materials loaded in a wagon, along with a young cowhand he introduced as Tommy. "Morning, Miss Evans," Grant said, removing his hat as he approached the porch where she stood. "Hope you slept well." "Well enough, thank you," she replied, though in truth she had lain awake for hours, thinking about her new circumstances and her enigmatic neighbor. Grant wasted no time in assessing the property. He pointed out issues Madeline hadn't noticed: loose boards on the porch, a leaking water pump, the sagging roof that needed immediate attention. His knowledge was impressive, his manner businesslike yet respectful. "I can fix most of this today," he explained. "Tommy here will help with the heavy lifting." As the men worked, Madeline busied herself establishing a small garden plot beside the cabin. The Texas soil was different from what she'd known in Massachusetts, but her father had taught her enough about farming to recognize good earth when she saw it. Midday brought sweltering heat, and Madeline brought water out to the men working on her roof. Grant had removed his shirt, revealing a muscular back bronzed by the sun and marked with a long scar that ran diagonally across his right shoulder blade. He turned when she approached, quickly pulling his shirt back on. "Pardon, Miss Evans," he said, accepting the water gratefully. "No need for apologies," she replied, trying to sound casual. "The work you're doing is more than worth any breach of etiquette." A hint of amusement crossed his features. "City manners don't count for much out here. Speaking of which, we should discuss those terms." They settled on an arrangement. Grant would continue to use 10 acres of her land for grazing, and in exchange, he would help with repairs and maintenance, teach her about ranching in this territory, and provide protection when needed. It was a fair deal, Madeline thought, though she couldn't help wondering if he offered it out of genuine business sense or pity. Over the following weeks, Madeline threw herself into transforming the cabin into a home. Her garden began to sprout, and she purchased 3 chickens from a farmer in town, setting up a small coop with Grant's assistance. She learned to watch for snakes, to recognize the warning signs of an approaching storm, and to appreciate the breathtaking beauty of Texas sunsets. Grant visited regularly, always professional but gradually more at ease in her company. He spoke little of himself, though sometimes he would mention his ranch, the Rocking V, or share practical advice about surviving on the frontier. Never once did he mention his deceased wife and child, and Madeline didn't ask, respecting the pain that sometimes shadowed his eyes when he watched her hanging laundry or tending to her chickens. One evening in late July, Madeline was returning from collecting eggs when she spotted Grant riding toward her property at an unusual pace. She set the egg basket on her porch and walked to meet him, alarmed by his grim expression. "Miss Evans," he called, dismounting quickly. "Lock your doors tonight and keep your shotgun close." "What's happened?" she asked, her heart racing. "The Sutton boys broke out of jail in San Antonio," he explained. "Sheriff Wilson sent word they were spotted heading this direction. They've got a score to settle with me, and they're not above using innocent folks to do it." Madeline paled. "Why would they come after you?" Grant's jaw tightened. "I was part of the posse that caught them after they robbed the bank in Austin last year. Shot their youngest brother when he drew on me." He hesitated. "I'd feel better if you stayed at my ranch tonight. My housekeeper would welcome the company and it's safer there." "I won't be driven from my home by criminals," Madeline replied firmly. "Besides, you taught me to shoot, remember? I can defend myself." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "That I did. You're a quick study, Miss Evans." "Madeline," she corrected him impulsively. "After all these weeks, I think we can dispense with such formality, don't you?" His expression softened momentarily. "Madeline," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "Still, I'll camp here tonight, just to be safe." She wanted to protest but recognized the determination in his eyes. "Very well. I'll prepare supper for two then." That night, after a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, they sat on her porch watching fireflies dance above the prairie grass. Grant had positioned himself in a chair with a clear view of the approach to her cabin, his rifle resting across his knees. "Tell me about Boston," he said unexpectedly. Madeline glanced at him, surprised by the personal question. "It's beautiful in its own way," she replied, "but very different from here. The streets are cobblestone, not dirt. The buildings stand shoulder to shoulder, and you can't see the horizon except from the harbor." "Why did you leave?" he asked, his eyes still scanning the darkness beyond her property. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was engaged to be married, an arrangement made by my stepmother after my father died. The man was wealthy, respectable, and utterly without warmth or compassion." She twisted the simple silver ring she wore on her right hand, her mother's ring, the only thing she had left of her. "When I received word of my uncle's death and my inheritance, I saw it as providence, a chance to escape." Grant turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable. "Does he know where you are?" "No," Madeline answered. "I left a letter breaking the engagement but gave no details of my destination." She smiled wryly. "I doubt he mourns the loss. His pride, perhaps, but not me." "Then he's a fool," Grant said quietly, returning his gaze to the darkness. The simple words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Madeline felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the dim light that hid her reaction. The Sutton gang never appeared that night, or the next. Sheriff Wilson sent word a week later that they'd been captured trying to cross into Mexico. Life returned to its regular rhythm, but something had shifted between Madeline and Grant. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. August brought scorching heat and little rain. Madeline's garden struggled, and the creek that bordered her property slowed to a trickle. Grant showed her how to conserve water, brought over a spare barrel to catch what little rain fell, and helped dig the well deeper when it began to run dry. One brutally hot afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing her chicken coop, Madeline asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why did you really leave that note in my mailbox? You could have simply introduced yourself when I arrived." Grant paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your uncle spoke of you often, said you had spirit but that Boston society was squeezing it out of you." He met her eyes directly. "When I heard you were coming, I was curious to see if he was right." "And was he?" Madeline asked softly. "He didn't know the half of it," Grant replied, a rare full smile transforming his face. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Madeline Evans." The compliment warmed her more than the summer sun. "I've had to be," she said simply. That evening, as Grant prepared to ride home, a distant rumble of thunder caught their attention. They looked west to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the first promise of rain in weeks. "Stay," Madeline said impulsively. "At least until the storm passes." He hesitated, conflicting emotions playing across his face. "That wouldn't be proper. Propriety seems a small concern when weighed against being caught in a deluge," she countered, then added more softly, "Please, Grant, I'd worry otherwise." Something in her tone must have convinced him, for he nodded and led his horse to her small barn. By the time he returned to the cabin, the wind had picked up, bending the prairie grasses and rattling the newly repaired shutters. They sat before the fireplace. Though the evening was warm, the small flame providing light rather than heat. The storm drew closer, lightning illuminating the cabin through the windows, followed by crashes of thunder that made Madeline jump despite herself. "Never liked storms much myself," Grant admitted, surprising her. "My wife, Catherine, she loved them. Used to sit on our porch and count the seconds between lightning and thunder to judge how close it was." It was the first time he'd spoken his wife's name in Madeline's presence. She remained still, afraid that any response might cause him to retreat back into silence. "Our daughter, Emma, was the same way," he continued, his voice low. "Fearless, just like her mother." He stared into the flames. "They got sick so quick, 3 days from first fever to last breath." "Nothing I could do." "I'm so sorry," Madeline whispered. Grant nodded once, accepting her sympathy. "Afterward, I couldn't bear to be in that house. Built a new one further north on my property, but I couldn't leave the land. It was Catherine's favorite place in the world." The storm broke then, rain hammering against the roof. Madeline moved to check that no water was coming through, relieved to find Grant's repairs holding firm. "You've made a real home here," Grant observed when she returned to her seat. "Your uncle would be proud." "I hope so," she replied. "Though I still have much to learn." "You're doing fine," he assured her. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, he added, "There's a harvest social in town next Saturday. I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." Madeline looked up sharply, caught off guard by the invitation. Grant's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw as he awaited her answer. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice steadier than her pulse. Relief and something else, anticipation, perhaps, flashed across his features. "Good," he said simply, but the word carried weight. The storm continued through the night. Grant insisted on sleeping in the chair rather than accepting Madeline's offer of her bed while she took the floor. In the morning, they discovered the rain had brought both blessing and destruction. Her garden was revived, but the creek had overflowed, washing away part of the fence Grant had built to keep her chickens safe. They worked together to repair the damage, their movements more synchronized than ever, their conversations flowing easily despite the physical labor. When Grant finally departed around noon, Madeline found herself watching until he disappeared over the horizon, wondering at the hollow feeling his absence left behind. The days leading up to the social dragged by with excruciating slowness. Madeline washed her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, and attempted to style her hair in a way that might look intentional rather than desperate. She hadn't brought many cosmetics from Boston, but she found a small pot of rouge and applied it lightly to her cheeks and lips. Saturday arrived clear and cooler than previous days, a welcome reprieve from the summer heat. Grant appeared precisely when promised, driving a freshly painted buggy pulled by a matching pair of bay mares. He had trimmed his beard and wore a clean white shirt under a black vest, with his best Stetson set at a careful angle. "You look lovely," he said, offering his hand to help her into the buggy. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy despite the weeks of growing friendship between them. "So do you, handsome, I mean." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks, and he cleared his throat before climbing up beside her. The drive to Austin took nearly an hour, during which they spoke of safe topics: the weather, her garden's recovery, his cattle's condition. Underneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of anticipation that made Madeline's nerves sing. The social was held in the town square, where tables laden with food surrounded a wooden platform for dancing. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between trees, waiting to be lit when evening fell. Already, dozens of families had gathered, the women in their best dresses, the men unusually clean and formal. When Grant helped Madeline down from the buggy, she noticed several people watching with undisguised interest. A woman approximately her age approached, her friendly smile revealing a slight gap between her front teeth. "You must be Miss Evans," she said warmly. "I'm Clara Wilson, the sheriff's wife. We're all so pleased you've come to join our community." "Thank you," Madeline replied, genuinely touched by the welcome. "Please call me Madeline." "Of course. And I see Mr. Vaughn has finally decided to attend a social event." Clara's eyes twinkled as she glanced at Grant. "It's only been, 4 years since we've seen you at one of these gatherings." Grant shifted uncomfortably. "Had my reasons for staying away, Clara. You know that." "Indeed I do," she agreed, her expression softening. "And I'm glad to see you found new reasons to come back." She turned to Madeline. "Come meet the other ladies while the men talk about cattle prices and rainfall. I promise to return you before the dancing starts." Madeline glanced at Grant, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on. I'll find us something to drink." Clara introduced Madeline to a dozen women in quick succession: the doctor's wife, the banker's daughter, the milliner who had recently become a widow, the schoolteacher who had never married. All were welcoming, though Madeline detected curiosity and speculation in their gazes, particularly when they mentioned Grant. "He's kept to himself since the tragedy," one woman whispered when Clara stepped away momentarily. "Some thought he might never recover. You must be quite special, my dear." Madeline wasn't sure how to respond. "We're neighbors," she said simply. "He's been very kind in helping me establish my home." The woman patted her arm knowingly. "Of course, dear, just neighbors." When the small band began tuning their instruments, Grant appeared at her side, offering a cup of punch. "Rescued just in time," he murmured. "Mrs. Pemberton has been matchmaking since before Texas was a state." Madeline laughed, grateful for his timely intervention. "Everyone's been very welcoming. This is a good community," Grant acknowledged. "Folks look out for one another here." The band struck up a lively reel, and several couples moved to the dance floor. Grant watched them for a moment, then turned to Madeline with an uncertain expression. "I'm afraid I'm out of practice," he admitted. "But if you'd like to dance—" "I would," she said, setting aside her cup. "And I don't mind a few missteps." Grant's hand was warm and steady as it settled at her waist. He led her through the dance with more grace than his warning had suggested, his eyes never leaving her face. Madeline felt a peculiar lightness in her chest, as though something long dormant was awakening within her. They danced 3 more times before taking a break to eat at one of the long tables. The sun had set, and the lanterns cast a golden glow over the gathering. Conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by introductions as various townspeople stopped to greet them. "You've caused quite a stir," Grant observed after the banker and his wife moved on. "First new resident in months, and a single lady from Boston at that." "I'm not the only one causing a stir," Madeline replied, nodding toward several matrons watching them with undisguised interest. "I believe your presence is considered the greater novelty." A shadow crossed his face. "I should have warned you. People will talk." "Let them," she said with unexpected fierceness. "I left Boston partly to escape others dictating my choices and judging my actions." Grant studied her face for a long moment. "You continue to surprise me, Madeline Evans." As the evening progressed, the music slowed. When the band began a waltz, Grant hesitated before offering his hand again. This dance brought them closer, his arm more firmly around her waist, her hand resting on his shoulder. Madeline could feel the steady beat of his heart, smell the clean scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. "Thank you for inviting me tonight," she said softly. "Thank you for accepting," he replied, his voice equally low. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" he hesitated. "I'm not the man I was before losing Catherine and Emma. Some days I'm not sure who I am at all, but when I'm with you—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. "When you're with me," she prompted gently. His blue eyes, turned silver in the lantern light, held hers. When I'm with you, I remember what it's like to look forward to tomorrow. The simple declaration stole Madeline's breath. Before she could respond, the music ended, and the spell between them wavered as people applauded the band. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. By the time they began the journey home, stars crowded the sky and a three-quarter moon cast silver light across the landscape. The temperature had dropped, and Grant wrapped a blanket around Madeline's shoulders as they rode. They traveled in comfortable silence for a while, until Grant spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said about people talking." "Oh," Madeline responded, wondering where his thoughts had led. "It occurs to me that if you're going to be the subject of gossip regardless, we might as well give them something worth talking about." He glanced at her, his expression hard to read in the moonlight. "I'd like to court you properly, Madeline, if you're amenable." Her heart leaped, but caution tempered her response. "Are you certain? It hasn't been very long since we met." "I've known you for nearly 2 months," Grant replied. "In that time, I've seen your courage, your determination, your kindness. I know your hands aren't afraid of hard work, and your mind isn't afraid of hard truths." He paused. "I'm not asking for promises, just permission to call on you with intentions beyond neighborly concern." Madeline considered his words. She had come to Texas seeking independence, not a new attachment. Yet there was something about Grant Vaughn that had slipped past her defenses from that first evening when he'd appeared at Sundown. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that very much." His smile was brief but genuine. "Good." They lapsed into silence again, but the quality of it had changed, charged now with possibility, and a sweet anticipation that carried them all the way back to Madeline's cabin. Grant helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering slightly at her waist before he stepped back. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon if that suits you." "It does," she replied, reluctant to see the evening end. He hesitated, then removed his hat and leaned forward slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. When she didn't move, he pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, his beard soft against her skin. "Good night, Madeline," he murmured. "Good night, Grant," she whispered back. She watched him drive away, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been. A smile spreading across her face despite her efforts to contain it. True to his word, Grant called on her the following afternoon. He brought a gift, a book of poetry he'd ordered from a catalog, knowing she missed the libraries of Boston. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Madeline deeply. Over the following weeks, their courtship unfolded with a measured pace that respected both their growing feelings and the watchful eyes of their small community. Grant invited her to the Rocking V, where she met his housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, a widow with sharp eyes and a kind heart who had known Grant since he was a boy. She showed Madeline the main house, larger than the cabin but still modest, with simple, sturdy furniture and windows positioned to catch the breeze. Grant took her riding across his property, showing her the creek where he'd taught Emma to fish, the meadow where wildflowers grew thickest in spring, the rise of land where he sometimes camped to watch stars on sleepless nights. Each revelation of his past was offered carefully, like a fragile gift he feared might break in the giving. In return, Madeline shared stories of her childhood in Massachusetts, her father's gentle guidance, her mother's early death, and her stepmother's cold practicality. She told him about her passion for books, her secret dream of perhaps one day opening a small school for the children of ranchers who lived too far from town for regular attendance. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn. Madeline's garden yielded a modest harvest that she preserved with Mrs. Abernathy's help. Grant continued to assist with maintaining her property, though now their work was interspersed with moments of growing intimacy, hands touching as they passed tools, conversations that delved deeper into hopes and fears, and increasingly frequent kisses that left them both breathless. One crisp October morning, Madeline opened her mailbox to find another note from Grant. "Meet me at sundown. Bring a warm shawl, GV." The echo of his first message made her smile. She spent the day in a state of pleasant anticipation, wondering what he had planned. When evening approached, she donned her best wool dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, and wrapped a cream-colored shawl around her shoulders. Grant arrived precisely at sunset, riding his chestnut stallion and leading a gentle mare he'd borrowed from a neighbor for Madeline. Their destination, he explained, was a surprise. They rode north beyond the boundaries of both their properties, following a narrow trail that wound through a stand of oak trees. As they emerged from the grove, Madeline gasped at the sight before them, a small plateau overlooking the valley, where Grant had arranged a picnic blanket surrounded by lanterns. In the distance, the lights of Austin twinkled like earthbound stars. "It's beautiful," she breathed as he helped her dismount. "I discovered this place the first year I came to Texas," Grant explained, tethering their horses to a nearby tree. "I wanted to share it with you." They settled on the blanket, and Grant unpacked a basket containing cold chicken, fresh bread, apple tarts from Mrs. Abernathy's kitchen, and a bottle of wine, a luxury in these parts. As they ate, watching the last colors of sunset fade from the sky, Madeline felt a contentment she had never known in Boston. Here, under the vast Texas sky, beside this quiet man whose strength was matched by his gentleness, she had found something she hadn't realized she was seeking. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That I'm grateful my uncle left me that cabin," she replied honestly, "and that you left that note in my mailbox." Grant's eyes reflected the lantern light as he reached for her hand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "About the past, the future, about us." Madeline's heart quickened. "And what conclusions have you reached?" "That grief doesn't vanish, but it can make room for joy. That second chances are rare and shouldn't be wasted." He took a deep breath. "That I love you, Madeline Evans, and I want to spend whatever years I have left showing you how much." Tears sprang to Madeline's eyes. "Grant, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this isn't what you came to Texas seeking. You wanted independence, your own path. I'm not asking you to surrender that. What we could build together would be a partnership, not a cage." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "Catherine wore it until she died. I've kept it safe, never thinking I would offer it to anyone else." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Madeline Evans, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Madeline looked at the ring, then into the face of the man she had come to love, a face lined by sun and sorrow, yet somehow more handsome to her than any she had ever known. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling over. "Yes, I will marry you, Grant Vaughn." His smile transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find love again," he confessed. "Never wanted to, until you stepped off that stagecoach and turned my world upside down." Madeline laughed softly. "I came here running away from a marriage. How strange that I've found one I want to run toward instead." They stayed on the plateau until the night grew too cold, talking of their future, making plans for a December wedding. Grant would build an addition to connect their properties, he suggested, so Madeline could keep her independence while they built a life together. The ride back to her cabin seemed shorter, wrapped in the glow of their engagement. At her door, Grant kissed her thoroughly, reluctantly pulling away when propriety demanded it. "I'll speak to the Reverend tomorrow," he promised. "And I suppose we should tell Mrs. Abernathy, though I suspect she's been planning our wedding since the first time I mentioned your name." Madeline laughed, touching the ring that now adorned her finger. "I look forward to becoming Mrs. Vaughn, and I look forward to calling you my wife," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. News of their engagement spread quickly through the community. Clara Wilson insisted on hosting a small celebration, and even Sheriff Wilson unbent enough to offer Grant a hearty handshake and a bottle of his best whiskey as a congratulatory gift. November brought preparations for both the wedding and the coming winter. Grant and Tommy, along with several neighboring ranchers, began construction on the addition that would connect Madeline's cabin to a new structure on the shared boundary of their properties. Madeline sewed curtains for their future home and began transferring her garden to a larger plot where the spring sun would reach it better. Not everyone celebrated their happiness, however. 3 weeks before the wedding, Madeline was alone at her cabin when a stranger appeared at her door, a well-dressed man with cold eyes and a Boston accent. "Miss Evans," he said, removing his hat. "I've come a long way to find you." Madeline's blood ran cold. "Mr. Blackwell, how did you find me?" "Money can buy information from even the most discreet sources," he replied smoothly. "Your stepmother was quite concerned when you disappeared. As was I, considering our arrangement. An arrangement I clearly dissolved before leaving," Madeline replied, her hand gripping the door frame. "I made my position quite clear in my letter." "A position I found unacceptable," he countered. "You made a commitment, Madeline. In Boston, such commitments are not so easily abandoned." He glanced past her into the cabin. "I see you've been living in rustic circumstances. Surely you've had enough of this frontier experiment. It's time to return home and fulfill your obligations." "This is my home now," Madeline stated firmly. "And I have new obligations that bring me joy rather than dread. I'm engaged to be married, Mr. Blackwell. You've wasted your journey." His expression hardened. "I've invested considerable time and resources in securing our arrangement. Your stepmother has already announced our engagement to all of Boston society. I will not return empty-handed and humiliated." Fear flickered through Madeline, but she stood her ground. "Then you'll have to endure humiliation, because I will never return to Boston with you. Please leave my property." Blackwell stepped forward, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. "You misunderstand, Madeline. I'm not asking." Before she could cry out, the sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly. Blackwell released her and stepped back just as Grant rode into view, his expression darkening when he saw the stranger at Madeline's door. "Everything all right here?" he asked, dismounting in one fluid motion. "This gentleman was just leaving," Madeline replied, her voice steadier than her nerves. Grant's eyes narrowed as he took in her pale face and the red marks on her wrist. "That's so. This is a private matter between Miss Evans and myself," Blackwell said coldly. "I suggest you continue on your way, Cowboy." "That's not happening," Grant replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "The lady asked you to leave. I'm making sure you do." Blackwell assessed Grant's imposing height and the determined set of his jaw. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I can buy and sell men like you a dozen times over." "Maybe in Boston," Grant acknowledged. "But this is Texas, and here, a man's worth isn't measured by his bank account." He stepped closer, his hand resting casually near his holster. "Now, I suggest you get back on whatever horse brought you here and ride away while you still can." For a tense moment, Blackwell seemed to consider his options. Then, with a scowl, he jammed his hat back on his head. "This isn't over, Madeline. Your frontier fantasy won't last." "I believe it is over," Grant countered. "And if I ever see you near my fiancée again, you'll wish you'd stayed in Boston." When Blackwell had ridden away, Grant turned to Madeline, his anger melting into concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" She shook her head, though the marks on her wrist told a different story. "How did you know to come?" "I didn't," Grant admitted. "I finished early at the ranch and thought I'd surprise you." He gently examined her wrist, his jaw tightening at the bruises forming there. "Who was he?" "Harold Blackwell, my former fiancé," Madeline explained. "The man my stepmother arranged for me to marry." Understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. "The man you fled Boston to escape." "Yes." She shivered despite the warmth of the day. "I never thought he would follow me here." Grant led her inside, settling her in a chair before building up the fire in her small stove. Once he had brewed her a cup of tea, he sat beside her, his expression grave. "Men like that don't give up easily when their pride is wounded," he said. "We should tell Sheriff Wilson, make sure he knows to watch for trouble." "Do you think he might return?" Madeline asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Grant covered her hand with his. "I don't know, but I do know he won't get near you again, I promise you that." True to his word, Grant arranged for Tommy to stay in her barn that night, while he rode to Austin to speak with Sheriff Wilson. The following day, the sheriff himself came to take Madeline's statement about Blackwell's threatening behavior. "We'll keep an eye out for him," Wilson assured her. "And I've sent telegrams to neighboring towns to be on alert as well." Grant insisted on accelerating work on their new home, determined that Madeline should not be alone until they were certain Blackwell had left the area. Mrs. Abernathy came to stay with her during the days when Grant couldn't be there, her capable presence a comfort against lingering fears. A week passed with no sign of Blackwell. Then another. As the wedding day approached, Madeline began to hope that her former fiancé had indeed returned to Boston, his pride wounded but his sense of self-preservation intact. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for a wedding. Madeline, dressed in the gown Clara Wilson had helped her create, ivory satin with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Her auburn hair was arranged with white roses, and she wore her mother's silver ring alongside her grandmother's pearls. Mrs. Abernathy fussed over every detail, her usual brisk manner softened by the occasion. "He's been like a son to me," she confided as she adjusted Madeline's veil. "After he lost Catherine and Emma, I feared he'd never find happiness again. You've brought the light back to his eyes." "He's brought light to mine as well," Madeline replied softly. The ceremony was held in the small church in Austin, filled to capacity with townspeople and neighboring ranchers. Grant waited at the altar, looking handsome and slightly nervous in his new suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his beard carefully groomed. As Madeline walked down the aisle on Sheriff Wilson's arm, he had offered to give her away in her father's absence. She saw only Grant, the man who had left a note in her mailbox, asking her to meet him at sundown, the man who had rebuilt her roof and her faith in love, the man who was now watching her with such tenderness that her heart felt near to bursting. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Grant's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by seemingly every household in the county. Music and dancing filled the afternoon, and even Grant, usually reserved in public, swung Madeline across the floor with a joy that infected everyone watching. As sunset approached, they prepared to depart for their wedding night to be spent at the hotel in Austin, before returning to begin their life together at their newly connected properties, which everyone had taken to calling Sundown Ranch after the story of their first meeting spread. Grant helped Madeline into their buggy, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by well-meaning friends. As they were about to leave, Sheriff Wilson approached, his expression troubled. "Grant, a word," he asked quietly. The two men stepped aside, speaking in low tones. Madeline watched with growing concern as Grant's relaxed posture stiffened. When he returned to the buggy, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "What is it?" she asked as they pulled away from the town hall. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," Grant replied, covering her hand with his. "This is our wedding day. I won't have it spoiled." But Madeline knew him too well now to be satisfied with that answer. "Grant, please. What did the sheriff say?" he sighed, recognizing her determination. "Blackwell was spotted in San Antonio yesterday. Wilson thinks he may be headed back this way." Fear fluttered in Madeline's chest, but she pushed it down. "Then we'll deal with him together. I'm no longer alone, and neither are you." Grant's expression softened. "No, we certainly aren't." He brought her hand to his lips. "Mrs. Vaughn." The way he said her new name sent warmth cascading through her. "Take me home, Mr. Vaughn," she replied softly. Their wedding night was everything Madeline had dreamed of and more tender, passionate, a true joining of bodies and hearts. In Grant's arms, she found a belonging she had never known before, a completeness that made her previous life seem like a half-remembered dream. Morning found them tangled in sheets at the Austin Hotel, reluctant to leave their private world but eager to begin their life together at Sundown Ranch. They breakfasted in their room before preparing for the journey home, Madeline now wearing a simple gold band alongside her engagement ring. The ride back was filled with comfortable silence and occasional bursts of conversation as they spotted wildlife or commented on the beauty of the winter landscape. Grant had his arm around Madeline, keeping her warm against the December chill. When they crested the hill that overlooked their property, Madeline's gasp made Grant pull the buggy to a halt. Below them, smoke billowed from the direction of her cabin. Even from this distance, they could see flames licking at the roof. "Stay here," Grant ordered, grabbing his rifle from beneath the seat. "No," Madeline replied firmly. "Whatever we face together." He hesitated, then nodded once, his expression grim. They continued down the hill at a faster pace, Grant keeping Madeline slightly behind him as they approached the burning cabin. The fire had clearly been set deliberately. It was concentrated at the front door and one window, blocking the main exits. Beyond the flames, they could see a figure moving inside. "Blackwell," Grant growled, recognizing the man even through the smoke. "Why would he burn my cabin with himself inside?" Madeline asked, horrified. Before Grant could answer, a shot rang out from within the structure. The bullet whizzed past them, embedding itself in a nearby tree. "Get down!" Grant pulled Madeline behind the buggy for cover. "He's lost his mind, Grant Vaughn," Blackwell's voice carried through the crackling flames. "I told her this frontier fantasy wouldn't last. If I can't have her, neither will you. He's trapped himself," Madeline realized with dawning horror. "He means to die in there and take my home with him." Grant's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." He turned to Madeline. "Ride to the Hammond place, get help. I'll try to get that lunatic out before the whole place goes up." "I won't leave you," she protested. "Madeline." His voice brooked no argument. "We need help, and I can't focus on saving him if I'm worried about you in the crossfire. Please." The logic of his argument won out over her fear for his safety. With a quick kiss, she mounted Grant's horse and rode toward the Hammond ranch as fast as she dared. By the time she returned with Mr. Hammond and his 2 grown sons, the scene had changed drastically. The fire had spread to most of the cabin, and Grant was no longer taking cover behind the buggy. Instead, he was dragging Blackwell's unconscious form away from the burning building. "Grant!" Madeline cried, dismounting and running toward him. He looked up, his face streaked with soot and blood from a cut above his eye. "Stay back. The roof's about to collapse." The Hammonds immediately set to work organizing a bucket brigade from the well, though it was clear the cabin couldn't be saved. Madeline ignored Grant's warning and rushed to his side, helping him move Blackwell a safe distance from the growing inferno. "What happened?" she demanded, examining the wound on Grant's forehead. "Fool tried to shoot me again when I called out to him," Grant explained, coughing from smoke inhalation. "But the heat must have affected his aim. I managed to circle around to the back window, found him passed out from the smoke." He looked at her cabin, now fully engulfed in flames. "I'm sorry, Madeline, I couldn't save your home." She touched his face, turning it away from the burning structure and toward her. "You're my home now," she said simply. "Everything else can be rebuilt." The Hammonds continued their efforts to contain the fire, ensuring it wouldn't spread to the surrounding prairie grass. Sheriff Wilson arrived within the hour, alerted by the column of smoke visible from town. He took the still unconscious Blackwell into custody, handcuffing him to the wagon seat. "Man's looking at serious charges," Wilson informed them. "Arson, attempted murder. He'll be spending years in prison if he survives his injuries." By nightfall, Madeline's cabin was a smoldering ruin. The new addition connecting it to what would have been their shared home was damaged but salvageable, and Grant's original structure on the northern edge of the property remained untouched. The Hammonds insisted that the newlyweds stay with them until repairs could be made, but Grant and Madeline declined, choosing instead to camp in the partially completed addition. With blankets donated by neighbors and a small stove salvaged from the barn, they created a makeshift home amid the charred timbers and promise of renewal. "Not exactly the wedding night I had planned for us," Grant said as they lay side by side on their bedroll, watching stars through the half-finished roof. Madeline snuggled closer to his warmth. "I don't know. There's something rather romantic about sleeping under the stars on our own land." He chuckled, his arm tightening around her. "You truly are remarkable, Madeline Vaughn. Most women would be in tears after losing their home on their wedding day." "I haven't lost anything that matters," she replied, resting her head on his chest. "And I've gained everything I never knew I wanted." They fell silent, listening to the night sounds of the Texas prairie coyotes calling in the distance, the soft rustle of wind through winter dry grass, the occasional hoot of an owl hunting in the darkness. "We'll rebuild," Grant promised, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. "Bigger and better than before, a proper home for our future." "Our future," Madeline repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new growth both on the land and in their lives. The partially completed addition became a full-fledged home, with a larger kitchen than either of their original cabins had boasted, and a sitting room where Madeline displayed her modest collection of books, now growing thanks to Grant's regular orders from catalog companies. They planted a garden together, twice the size of Madeline's original plot. Grant taught her to ride astride rather than side-saddle, and she taught him to appreciate poetry read aloud by lamplight on quiet evenings. They worked side by side mending fences, tending cattle, making plans for the future of Sundown Ranch. Harold Blackwell was sentenced to 12 years in prison for his crimes. When Sheriff Wilson delivered the news, Madeline felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the last lingering connection to her old life in Boston severed by justice and time. Summer brought sweltering heat and the discovery that their family would soon grow. When Madeline first suspected she was with child, she waited until evening to share the news, meeting Grant at the mailbox as he returned from checking fence lines on the northern boundary. "I left something for you," she said, gesturing to the mailbox with a secretive smile. Puzzled, Grant opened it to find a tiny knitted booty nestled inside. He stared at it for a long moment before understanding dawned on his face. "Madeline." His voice was barely a whisper. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her hands clasped nervously at her waist. "Doctor Maxwell confirmed it yesterday. The baby should arrive in January." Grant lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, his joy evident in the tears that glistened in his eyes. "A baby," he murmured against her hair. "Our baby." That night, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Grant's hand resting protectively over Madeline's still flat stomach. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confessed. "A family, a future to look forward to. Are you frightened?" Madeline asked softly, knowing the ghosts that sometimes still haunted his dreams. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also more grateful than I can express." He kissed her tenderly. "You gave me back my heart, Madeline Vaughn. Now you're giving me back my hope." The months of Madeline's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Grant built a cradle with his own hands, carving tiny stars and moons into the headboard. Mrs. Abernathy knitted blankets and tiny garments, while Clara Wilson organized a baby social, where the women of the community brought gifts and advice in equal measure. January 17, 1877, brought a howling blizzard rare for Central Texas, and with it, the early arrival of their son. Grant rode through the storm to fetch the doctor, then paced anxiously outside their bedroom door until Mrs. Abernathy ordered him to either be useful or get out of the way entirely. When at last he was allowed to enter, Madeline lay exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she invited, her voice tired but happy. Grant approached cautiously, as though afraid his presence might somehow disturb the miracle before him. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's delicate features. "He's perfect," Grant whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek. "What shall we call him?" "I thought perhaps Thomas, after your father," Madeline suggested. "Thomas Henry Vaughn." Grant's throat tightened with emotion. "Thomas Henry," he repeated. "A good, strong name." He sat carefully beside them on the bed, one arm around Madeline's shoulders, the other supporting his son's swaddled form as she transferred the baby to his embrace. The fierce, protective love that surged through him in that moment was both familiar and entirely new, a connection to the past and a promise for the future, wrapped in the innocent perfection of his son's sleeping face. "Thank you," he murmured to Madeline, his voice rough with unshed tears. "For everything." She leaned against him, exhausted but content. "Our family," she whispered, "our future." Outside, the blizzard continued to blanket Sundown Ranch in white, but within the walls of their home, warmth and love created a sanctuary against winter's chill, a testament to the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple note in a Prairie mailbox. "Meet me at sundown." Spring 1884 brought lush greenery to Sundown Ranch, now expanded to include both Grant's original property and additional acres purchased from neighbors over the years. The main house had grown too, with rooms added to accommodate their growing family: Thomas, now 7, and his sister Elizabeth, 4. Madeline stood on the porch, watching her children play with the puppies that had been born to their border collie the previous month. Her hand rested unconsciously on her abdomen, where a third child was just beginning to make its presence known. She hadn't yet told Grant about this latest blessing, waiting for the perfect moment. 7 years of marriage had only deepened their love. The passionate romance of their early days had matured into something even more precious, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering commitment. In town, Madeline had established a small lending library that had grown into a proper school for the children of outlying ranches. Grant had become a respected voice in the community, helping mediate disputes between neighboring ranchers and serving as an unofficial advisor to Sheriff Wilson. As Madeline watched, Grant rode into view, returning from a meeting in Austin. Thomas spotted him first, abandoning the puppies to run toward his father with arms outstretched. Grant dismounted in one fluid motion, scooping his son up and spinning him around before setting him on the saddle. Elizabeth followed more cautiously, her mother's temperament evident in her careful approach, but her face lit up when Grant lifted her to join her brother. The sight of her husband with their children never failed to fill Madeline with gratitude. There had been difficult times, drought years that threatened the ranch, a fever that had nearly taken Elizabeth as an infant, occasional nightmares that still woke Grant in a cold sweat, but through it all, they had faced each challenge together. Grant walked the horse toward the house, one hand steadying each child on the saddle, his smile widening when he caught sight of Madeline on the porch. Even now, that smile could make her heart skip a beat. "How was the meeting?" she called as they approached. "Productive," he replied. "The railway company has agreed to establish a stop 5 miles south of here. It'll make getting cattle to market much easier next season." He helped the children down before climbing the porch steps to greet his wife with a kiss. "You look beautiful today," he murmured, his hands resting lightly on her waist. Madeline smiled, covering his hands with her own and moving them slightly lower to the barely perceptible swell of her stomach. "I have news," she said softly. Grant's eyes widened in understanding, then crinkled at the corners as joy spread across his features. "Really?" he whispered. She nodded. "Dr. Maxwell thinks early October." He gathered her into a gentle embrace, mindful of their audience. "I love you," he said simply, those 3 words carrying the weight of their shared history and hopes for the future. "I love you too," Madeline replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him again. From the yard, Thomas called impatiently, "Pa, you promised to show me how to rope today." Grant laughed, releasing Madeline with a promise in his eyes. "Later," he whispered before turning to his son. "So I did, young man. Let's get these chores finished first, then we'll practice until supper." As he descended the steps to rejoin their children, Madeline marveled at how completely her life had transformed from that first day in Austin. The lonely, frightened young woman who had fled Boston seeking only independence could never have imagined the fullness of the life she would build here, a life that began with a mysterious invitation tucked into a Prairie mailbox. "Meet me at sundown," Grant had written, not knowing he was extending an invitation not just to a conversation, but to a lifetime of love, partnership, and belonging. Watching her family now, Grant demonstrating proper not tying to Thomas, while Elizabeth solemnly mimicked his movements, Madeline offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold, the same colors that had illuminated their first meeting at her uncle's weathered cabin so many years ago. Then, as now, sundown heralded not an ending but a beginning, the promise of tomorrow, of dreams yet to be fulfilled, of love that continued to grow with each passing season. And in that golden light, Madeline Evans Vaughn knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she was meant to be.